Hey everyone, and welcome as we now are starting a new series, or we're starting a new series called "Forgiven to Forgive." We've had some requests to talk about forgiveness and forgiving others, and honestly, this is something I need. Honestly, most of these studies, most of this stuff, it is something I need as well. But the idea for this study was, we need to learn to forgive people, and that can be hard. That can be really hard, and we're gonna go through this study and as we look at it and look at these things. And so, but the idea here is, forgiven to forgive, and we'll see where that verse comes from. But we're going to start this one out. This particular lesson today is called the little things, and learning to basically let go the little things, let it go, and not focus on the little things. It can be hard sometimes. This comes from, right, we're going to look at this comes from Colossians 3:12 through 13. This whole series is really coming out of this and based out of this. And it says, since God chose you to be the holy people he loves, you must clothe yourself with with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. A lot of the things we've just been talking about in our study on the Holy Spirit, we have to, clothe ourselves with these things. Make allowances for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. That's hard, man. That's hard to forgive someone that offends you, especially if it's severe, right? But he closes it with this, and this is why. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others, and that's a very important thing. And we're going to look at, some of this. We're going to look at what happens if you don't in this series as we go through it. And so, this looking at this series, here's what we're going to have on forgiving, right? That we're going to have and that we're going to go through. We're going to look at this today's lesson. Message is the small things, looking at the small things. The next one's going to be looking at the big things, forgiving the big things. It's probably going to, well, I say going to be the hardest, but I do think this is probably going to be one of the harder ones of this series. Is looking at those big things, those huge things that we have to forgive. You know, they can be some bad things, nasty things that happen to us that people have done to us, but yet we still have to forgive those things. The next one is forgiving God. Now, if we're going to be theologically, I guess, correct on this, God doesn't need forgiving for anything. We know that he's not done anything wrong, but it's that idea in our mind, right? God, like, why did you allow this to happen? You let this happen, and we've got to get past that. We've got to learn to forgive God in our own minds, right? Like I said, technically we don't have to forgive. God doesn't need forgiving for anything, but in working that out to where we forgive God for allowing something to happen, maybe when we think it shouldn't happen, or something happened to us. So we're going to look at that. And then lastly, and then this one may be the hardest one, is forgiving ourselves. Looking at forgiving yourself for either the things you've done, or hurts you've caused, or maybe the things you've done to yourself. We'll look at that. Learning to forgive yourself for the times that you've fallen, and the times that you've looked at things. And so, I'm going to start this lesson series out, and this one on little things out with, do you know someone who's easily offended? Right? It probably doesn't take you very long. It's half the world at this point, it seems like. But you know, if you don't, then you've never been on social media. All right. If you don't know anyone, then you've never been on it's social media at all, because everyone's perpetually offended on social media. But right, you find these people, right, and they find themselves offended and annoyed and hurt and bothered by so many small insignificant things. And I can find myself in there, right? Someone rolls their eyes at you, you're gonna be, oh, I'm offended. That person rolled their eyes. Can you believe that? Oh, they talked to me in that tone, right? This tone. And then you're in traffic, and this is probably mine, right? I'm, not that I'm some crazy lunatic driver, but man, traffic can drive me crazy. And it's like one of the things that my pet peeves is, like, if I let someone in and they don't wave and they don't say thank you, right, by nodding or showing it, drives me nuts. Drives me nuts. Like, you can't say, I'm offended because you can't do a simple thing like say thank you. And so, some of the other things, maybe like, oh, maybe you text someone, right, and they're slow to they're slow to respond. Like, oh, well, they're not my friend anymore. They don't like me, or all that stuff. Where you see them, the worst, right, is you see that they get it, and the little bubbles, us iPhone users, the little bubbles start popping up, and we see that they're responding, and then they never respond. Then it goes dark. It's like, oh my goodness, we're offended. They don't like me, or they don't, blah blah blah. And so, or maybe it's social media, right? Everyone. So no one liked your post. Someone didn't like your post. Oh, well, I'm going to be offended that someone didn't comment. And that's unpardonable. I can't believe it. I'm unfollowing these people, right? And that's just how we behave now. That's how people behave nowadays. We just live in this age, right? Of perpetual just offense, right? Perpetual just being offended by everything, right? We're quick to judge, we're quick to condemn, we're quick to call foul, we're quick to be offended by everything. And I'll give an example. Like I try not to be this way, but I was kind of this way in high school. And part of the reason was I moved around a lot in high school, or not just high school, but as a kid we moved around a lot. And so I got, being the new kid, you got picked on some and it's like, so like I was just looking for it. I know these people are going to pick on me, and so I would just look for trouble, right? You stare at me wrong, or you stare at me too long, or you do these things to me and you, it was on, we were going to fight, right? But here's the thing I learned. And here's what I learned in this, right? If you're on a continuous search to be offended, you're always going to find what you were looking for. If I was looking for someone who was trying to start a fight with me or trying to pick on me or trying to cause trouble with me, I was always going to find it. I always found someone who was willing to, to annoy me, or if I thought annoy me, or come in. Always. I could have done it almost every day if I wanted to. It was ridiculous, right? It was absolutely ridiculous. But we live like this. A lot of us live like this on a daily age. And here's the thing, right? Here is the absolute thing. There's no winning in living like this. There's no winning in living an offended life. No one has ever said, oh, my life was so much more productive because I lived this way, right? Because I was always looking for some reason to be offended. No one has ever said, my life was so much better because I went around and was offended all the time. And so we've got to make sure, right, that we're not living this way. Like our life is too short. Right? What we're called to be is too great to be offended by something small. Can you imagine if Jesus said, well, I'll look at that here in a minute. And so we look at Proverbs 19:11, right? Sensible people control their temper. They earn respect by overlooking wrongs. And so this is, what's this mean? Sensible people control their tempers. They earn respect by overlooking wrongs. We're going to come back to this, we're going to come back to this verse in a little bit and look at that overlooking wrongs. But this is what sensible people do. And that's what he's saying there. And so the thought is, then how do we get past it? How do we get over this stuff? How do we grow past our daily temptation to be offended, right? And to especially be offended by everything. We're taught to be this way, right? If you look at the news, you look at a lot of what they're teaching in classes and school, even at work, in some work situations, like, well, you just got to constantly be looking for this, right? This person's probably looking to offend you, or this. It's like we're taught that everyone's out to get us, and that's not the case, you know. And so, how do we grow past this? How do we grow past this daily temptation to feel right, or to be offended? And the simple is we do what's called closing the gap, and we close it with love. And what do you mean by closing the gap? What do you mean by that? Well, let's look at Proverbs 10:12 first, right? Hatred stirs up quarrels, but love makes up for all offenses. Well, that's an interesting verse, right? Hatred stirs up quarrels, but love makes up for all offenses. And so, what I want you to understand here, right? When I say we've got to choose what we put in the gap, or we've got to fill the gap with love, right? There's this dynamic that exists between every interaction, however short it may be, right? We don't recognize it because too often we're not paying attention in the moment. I think sometimes we see the offense and we're thinking how we're going to react to the offense, but there's this gap, right? It's kind of like this, for every action there's a reaction, right? But there's a gap in between the action and the reaction. So this action happens, and so what's our reaction going to be? Well, what determines our reaction is what we put in the gap between the action and the reaction. And as Christians, it is our duty, it is our response to fill that gap with love, right? And if you go back, right, if we go back to Proverbs 10:12, love makes up for all offenses. Now, we could fill that we could fill that gap with hatred, and that's just going to stir up more problems, right? But if we fill that gap with love, then it's going to make up for all those offenses. And so that we get to choose, right? That is like, well, I just can't control it. Yes, you can. We can control ourselves. We can control our anger. We can control our mouths. We can control a lot of things, right? And so we get to choose what we put in that gap, right? And the example of this, right? If someone flips me off, right? What's in the gap? We've got to interpret that. Maybe it was maybe they were flipping off the person behind you, right? Or that's one of the things, right? That's one of the things is too, is we are horrible interpreters, especially if it's over text messaging, that kind of stuff. Is anyone in here, or sorry, anyone in here, anyone out there ever misinterpreted what you said or did? Has anyone ever misinterpreted anything you said or done? All the time, right? It's like, oh, I didn't mean it that way. It's not what I meant. Man, I'm sorry you would even think that. That's not what I was trying to do. And what this is called, right? If you look at this is called what they call it, the fundamental attribution error. And so we're getting into this a little bit of psychology here, but I like to sometimes blend science and the Bible together, because put science and God together. He created science, right? And so we can see this. But it's the fundamental attribution error. And what this is, right? This is a bias to attribute our behavior, so my behavior, to my circumstances, right? I acted that way because of this, right? I acted this way because, man, I was just having a bad day, or this person did this, that's why. While at the same time, we attribute someone else's action to their character, right? Well, I did that because of these circumstances, but that person did that because they're a horrible person, right? If I did something to disappoint you, then there's a reason. You need to give me a break. It was because of this, right? This, I had a bad day at work, or this person was mean to me, or whatever. We can come up with another bunch of scenarios like, oh, you need to forgive me, right? But if you do something that offends me, well, it's your character. You're a horrible person, right? And you're mean and you're rude, and Jesus needs to save your soul, type of thing, right? And so it's just crazy. I say crazy. Maybe I shouldn't say crazy, but it's how our mind works. It's like, well, I did this because of my circumstances. You did that because you're a horrible, evil person, right? If I cut someone off in traffic, I'm sorry, I just did not see you. But someone cuts you off. Well, that person's an idiot, and they need their driver's license taken away, right? I should ram them with my car. That's another thing. It's like they're evil people like that. If I cut someone off, well, it's okay. But if that person cuts someone off, well, they're evil, right? And so we've got to learn that there's always this gap, and we've got to learn to give the same type of grace that we want to give ourselves. We've got to learn to give that grace to other people, and so we have to learn that there's always this gap that we have to fill. If that person cuts you off, you choose how you react. Okay, you know what? Maybe he just didn't see me. Maybe she just didn't see me in that. And so we've got to learn about that, right? The devil wants us to fill a gap with accusations. We want to, well, that person's just all about themselves. They don't care, or we can't trust those people anymore. We can't trust that person. We weren't that close anyways, right? All those type of things. Filling the gap with accusations and with hatred, it destroys marriages. We've seen that. Like, if you get into a marriage like that, and if every time the husband or wife does something, it's like, oh, well, they're doing that because they're this is their character, or this is who they are. Instead of giving grace, it erodes marriages. It splits friendship, and more than anything, and I've seen this firsthand, it destroys churches. Right? But for whatever reason, when people start filling that gap with hatred, with accusations, and with coming after and attacking people's character, it absolutely destroys church. It erodes them. Not always at first, 100%, but it's slowly, just like it does marriages, it slowly erodes, and it's a sad thing to see. And so that's why God wants us to fill the gap with love. And like I said, we get to choose what we put in that gap. God wants us to fill that gap with love, right? Proverbs 17:19, it says, love prospers when a fault is forgiven, but dwelling on it separates close friends. Look at that. Love prospers when a fault is forgiven. And this is what we've got to do. We've got to learn to forgive the faults of people in our everyday life, right? Love gives the benefit of the doubt. It trusts the other person. It assumes the best, and it believes in the other person. If you don't give the benefit of the doubt, if you don't trust other people, if you don't assume the best, and if you don't believe in other people, it's going to be a sad, miserable life. Now, I'm saying they're not always, you cannot always do these things. People are going to lose that, but we can't just jump to that conclusion every single time. We've got to be careful in that. And so, you know, if you have a friend like that doesn't text you, there's no response, maybe they got busy. Maybe we got to learn to that, all right? That's because if you go to that site, well, they're just too good for me. They're not my bad. They're a bad friend. They're not my best friend like I thought they were. If you just jump to that, that's not what love does. Love trusts, love believes, right? Maybe they just had a busy day. Maybe their phone died. Maybe they forgot. How many of us, right? Again, this goes to the care that this whole, you know, attribution thing, right? How many of us have gotten a text, started to respond, got sidetracked, and forgot 3 days later we remembered to respond, right? And so we've got to, maybe they forgot, maybe they're the same way. And so that's the type of things that we've got to look at. And so we go to this, Proverbs 19:11, and we're looking at this, right? Because of our love, let me go back to this. There's a couple of things I want to say on this, and too, because of our love, right? We make allowances, right? This whole series is about God forgiving us, and so we have to forgive others. We've got to learn it's not all about us. We've become such a self-centered, honestly, in a certain way, narcissistic society. Everything's about us, right? Someone's bad mood isn't always about you. More than 99% of the time, it's not about you, right? The edge in their voice isn't about you. Their careless driving isn't about you, right? It's not like they're doing it because they don't like you. Like someone's bad day, like it's not you. It's not because of you. Maybe they're distracted. Maybe they got bad news. Maybe they're fighting a battle. There's so many people fighting battles that we just don't know, we don't see. And so we've got to stop making ourselves so important and remember it's not about us. There's so many things that aren't about us. And so none of us are perfect, right? None of us are perfect. And we want others to give us the benefit of the doubt. If we mess up or if we make a mistake, we want others to give us the benefit of the doubt, then we need to do the same thing for others. And so, someone has to ask, well, what if someone is intentionally rude? What if someone is just blatantly hurtful? Like they're just really trying to hurt you? Well, here's one of the things that I've learned. We have to wonder, what's that person going through? Because here's what I've learned, right? Hurt people hurt people. All right. Hurting people hurt other people. Right. So instead of being offended by someone when they're intentionally, have compassion for them. This is a hard thing. This is especially a hard thing for me because that's not my first reaction, right? If someone's trying to intentionally hurt me, however you're trying to hurt me, I want to hurt you back tenfold, right? I'll show you to never try to hurt me again, right? You try to punch me, right? I'm going to try to get you on the ground and knock you out because I'm going to teach you, oh, you're not never going to, you're not going to mess with me. But that's not what God calls us to do. God calls us to look over this. We're going to see this here in a second, right? We're to show compassion for them. There's a reason they're lashing out. There's a reason they're hurting. And so that's why we see in Proverbs 19:11, right? It says, sensible people control their temper. They earn respect by overlooking wrongs. We overlook offenses, right? We overlook them. Now, this isn't the same as saying pretend it didn't happen, right? So this, because there's a toxic side of Christianity where it's like, oh, if that person hit you or did this horrible thing to you, then you just need to pretend like it didn't happen and be their best friend. That's not what we're called to be. And I want people to understand that if you have someone teaching you that, you need to get away from it. That's toxic. That's very toxic, and that is very harmful because that's not what God is teaching here, right? God is not saying, okay, you have to go and be their best friend again, or you have to pretend like it didn't happen. That's not what he's saying. He's saying let it go, right? It's a form of forgiveness. Get past it. Get over it. And so this is what I want to look. The Hebrew word here for overlook is avor, right? And it means to pass over, right? It means to pass over. And it means to pass over it in the moment. It's not it happened and you dwell on it and you fight about it and you know, and then it's as it's happening, to you, you pass over it. Right? As this person is offending you, you get over it. Now, this is something that takes work. It's something you've got to work towards, because it's not natural. It's not an instinct in human nature to say, oh, well, this person did something to offend me or might be trying to hurt me. I just need to get over it. Right? I need to go. It's this idea of forgiving it in the moment. Right? Coworker didn't invite you to a party. Okay, I'm over it. It's okay. Right? Someone makes a rude comment to you in person or on social media, or says something you don't like on social media. I'm over it. Right? Here's the thing we need to learn. No one has made a difference in this world, has made change in this world, has done anything of significance in this world by walking around being bitter at all. All right? Can you imagine if Jesus was that way? Can you imagine if Jesus walked around like this? Right? Can you imagine that? Right? Can you imagine? I'm sorry, I missed this slide here, but can you imagine if Jesus walked around? Oh, well, Matthew, he didn't pay attention to my sermon. Well, the one sermon I was given on the Mount. Right? And so, man, that hurt my feelings. Jesus, my feelings are hurt. I'm not going to talk to Matthew anymore. Right? Or the Pharisees were mean to me, or they gave me another look, or they made a nasty comment about something, and I just can't stop thinking about that. And there's no way for me to calm down. And I was, what if Jesus behaved that way? Right? What if Thomas, right? Or what if he got mad because, oh, well, Thomas, I performed this miracle. I raised this person from the dead. And Thomas didn't even say anything about it. He didn't compliment me. He didn't do anything. Right? That's not what his mission was about. And Jesus' mission wasn't about him. It was all about love that we're called to fill that gap with. Jesus had plenty of reasons to be offended, right? They were trying to kill and murder the man, and they eventually did, right? And so he had plenty of reason to be offended, but his mission was to come and show the Father's love. And so here's the lesson that I want you to get out of this, right? Is the calling ahead of you, the calling ahead of me, is greater than the offense behind me. Right? You can choose to go forward being offended, right? You can, but you're never going to fulfill as a Christian, the calling that you're called to. That's not what we're called to do. We're called, right? The devil wants us to fill these gaps with accusations, with all kinds of things, with hatred and all that stuff. God's called us to fill that gap with love. And that's what we need to do. We need to do this in our marriage, our friendships, our work, and definitely our ministry. Right? We've got to learn to extend grace. Because why? Because we are forgiven to forgive. That is what Jesus did for us. And so we have to do it for other people. It's not an optional thing. It is a command. And we're going to look at it next week on what happens if we choose not to. If we choose not to forgive others, then we're not going to be forgiven. Right? Gave the secret away for next week. But that's what we have to understand. That's what we have to learn to understand there. And so I want to finish this with this, right? Your life, our lives are too short, and our calling, who we are called to be, like who we're called to be, is so great to be offended by something small, especially all the time. That's not what we're called to do. That's not who we're called to be. We are called to be forgiven, right? We're called to forgive others because we're forgiven. We have this great mission ahead of us, and we cannot fulfill that mission if we're running around being offended by every little thing that every Christian says, or for every non-Christian says, or, well, that church over there is doing this, and that, man, is such a huge problem. Like we're so busy looking around trying to find reasons to be offended by what other Christians are doing, what other churches are doing, or all this stuff, that we're missing the mark so bad. We're missing the mission so bad. And 99% of the stuff we get offended about is not even worth getting offended for. And so we've got to learn to pass over it. We've got to learn to get over it. We've got to learn to move on. And again, like I said, it's not saying that we don't pretend like it didn't happen. If someone hurts you deeply, and we're going to look at that next week. We're going to look at the big things next week. But if someone hurts you deeply, right, we're called to forgive. And we have to forgive. And the main reason we have to forgive, not only because Jesus forgave us, because if we don't forgive people, if we stay offended, then we cannot fulfill the mission of God. We cannot fulfill the mission of Christ, and we're a hindrance to the church, and we're a hindrance to ourselves. And like I said, if you look back through this, right? No one, I've never looked at someone who's made a huge impact in the world, in Christianity, or anything, and said, man, that person walked around offended all the time. No, most of the time they're the kindest, forgiving, like, oh, that's okay. Let it roll off our back like a duck type of person, right? And that's what we're called to be. That's who we're called to be. We have to forgive people. We have to learn to get over the little things. We have to learn to get over these small things. We've got to learn to stop looking for them, stop looking for reasons to be offended. And we've got to forgive people because that is what we're commanded to do. As always, I appreciate this. I hope this has been a good start in this series. I hope it is something that that we get a lot of. I know I needed it. A lot of people have told me, "Hey, I need this lesson. It's something I'm struggling with, and so can we study this?" And so it's like, "Hey, I need this just as much as everyone else out there does." So I hope it works. As always, I appreciate everyone for watching.